Okay, so I'm going to attempt to replace these parts here. They're all fuel related. Looks like somebody over the years has trimmed that. They've trimmed it too short, so I bought new fuel hose. I'm going to have to drain the tank to get that out. So I just picked up just some cheap coolant hose actually from the auto parts store, and I'm going to attempt to siphon it into buckets. It's the first time I tried to siphon fuel, so let's see how this goes. So here comes the fun. Oh, damn. So what I ended up doing here is unscrewing the fuel filter that's on the bottom of this pump. Once I did that, I found a bunch of dirt underneath, so I figured I'd unbolt the pump so I could clean it out. It kind of has a poor design here in that debris and everything kind of can land on top of the fuel filter and work its way in. You might see it when I get a little closer here, but I ended up just taking it off, cleaning it out, and then putting it back on. That was the only way I could guarantee that debris wasn't going to be in there because I couldn't get to the backside because it's so tight against the frame. You can see the new versus old filter. The old one bottom snapped right off very easily. If I were to guess, I would say this might be the original filter based on the condition of this plastic. You can also see how the cap allows debris to fill up inside, so when you go to change it, it's easy to contaminate the new filter or inlet unless you clean the pump thoroughly. So I'm taking a little bit of diesel fuel and just lubing up the O-ring. That'll help it seat a little better and hopefully seal great. And then I'm installing the new fuel line. Disconnect the plug at the bottom. Oh, and then it falls apart, which is always awesome. We're gonna put the seal back on here first, and make sure you line it up correctly. It's about as good as she's gonna get. She'll probably always fall apart when you take it apart. So normally this filter is screwed on here hand tight, but unfortunately this was really stuck and I had to use another tool to get this started.
Hooray! What's that?
So it's always recommended when you change the fuel filter here that you also change this O-ring. And to correctly install this filter, you want to put it in the canister first because it has a couple of alignment pegs, and then screw it into the base of the fuel filter holder. I also thought it was a good idea to change this O-ring that's at the bottom of the canister. I'm just applying a little bit of diesel fuel to help lube it when I put it back on. Filter and new filter, much different. So once again, since I don't know the exact service history of this tractor, it wouldn't surprise me if these belts were never changed, so I'm gonna go ahead and take care of that as well. So one thing that's a good idea to do before you take off the old belts is kind of take the new ones out of the package, line them up, make sure they're the right size, because I've had it before where they've given you the wrong belts. So before you get it all torn down and have to put it back together, just verify that these are the correct belts. Not only were these belts weirdly rusted to the pulleys, but also when you flipped them over and tried to bend them, you'd see that they'd crack. So it was time that these got changed. So one thing that I noticed is that each of these pulleys had kind of a channel worn into them, probably just from normal wear and tear, but I wanted to clean that up. So I started with some steel wool, hoping that that would cut most of it, and it did a pretty good job, but one of these pulleys here needed a lot more work. I ended up making sure I could just take that ridge out that you could feel, and I got that nice and smooth, that way it won't chew up my belts. So you can see the chunks of rust in there that are making it rough and will ultimately chew up the belt a bit. And there we go, there's a heavy chunk there. You want it ideally to be kind of nice and shiny. I'm still going to work on this a little bit, but you'll see after some sanding, that's mostly shiny. It's still got a couple of rough patches, but it feels nice on the finger, and that's what's important, is that it actually feels smooth. It doesn't have to look perfect. After I finished sanding it smooth, I wiped it all down just to remove any loose debris before reinstalling the new belts. So the manual calls for the belt to be tensioned to a point where it will deflect 10 to 12 millimeters, which is about the width of this belt when you apply 22 pounds of force to it. And that's kind of about what I'm seeing here. Now what's important is to run this engine for a few hours and then come back and retension it, because the belt will wear a little bit and it'll kind of settle in the grooves here a little bit nicer than it is now. So now that I had everything back together, it was time to try it all out. What I didn't know at this point is when you turn the ignition key, the low pressure pump should have started priming the fuel system, which you can see did not happen here. So now I needed to dig a little deeper and try to figure out the fuel pump issue. So for the first step of troubleshooting, I wanted to make sure that the pump was actually getting 12 volts. So I popped off the connector and had my wife go into the cab and turn it to the on position. And I could see that I was getting 12 volts, so clearly something was happening inside the pump that wasn't working. So I looked at some forums online and some of them said to try tapping it while you've got power applied to it. So none of that seemed to free it up, and when you take this pump out, you see it's kind of a self-contained pump and you can't really do much repair, so had to order one from Cat.
Anyhow, new part. I'm sure it looks like a $30 generic part, but I don't want to risk it. So, of course, through Caterpillar, it's $200. Also, while I'm at this, I'm going to be putting in a fuel shutoff in the bottom. That way, when I do have to do work on the fuel system, I don't have to drain it. I don't have to drain the tank to get to these lower filters and stuff. So, anyhow, that is on the list to put in. So, here we go.
When I took the fuel hose out, I also decided to switch to these self-tightening spring clamps. They're just much easier to work with, and you don't need to worry about over-tightening them. Ta-da! Another thing done. If you're wondering what this cable is, this is going to be for the camera that I'm still working on getting that all connected. So there we go, old bad fuel pump. It's dripping fuel everywhere. Fantastic. Old broke, shiny new. Okay, so now we're going to test the fuel pump. We should see this fill, and then we should see this fill. Yay! So now we're going to try to start the beast. Yay! Yay, yay, yay! Okay, so it works. It works. I noticed a few zip ties that had come loose and things were rattling, so I'm going to zip tie those up real quick. I don't see any fuel leaks down here, so that's all terrific. One of the last things I did before I left town is we flushed and cleaned the radiator. It sat for so long, I think finally all the air bubbles came out. And you probably see that my radiator tank over here is empty. So we're going to top that. That's a few more things on the list that I was able to check off as we get this cat back up to snuff. I really appreciate all of you watching, liking, and subscribing. The next thing we've got is this bottom part, which is fucking disgusting. So stand by while I clean that.
You just woke up and felt awake?
I woke up like 45 minutes ago.
Did you have a nightmare or an alarm?
Nope.
Oh my god, something's wrong with you. Nobody wakes up early for fun.